Thank you for having me. I've been watching these 2-minute warning signs. I'm getting anxious, so I'm going to try to stay on track here. I'm the VP of HR with a company called MedReleaf, which is one of the largest producers of medical cannabis in Canada. We're the 9th company to get a license from Health Canada. There are now over 105. So we're based out of Markham, Ontario, and I spent a lot of my time working with employers to help them prepare for the upcoming legalization of recreational cannabis. So before I start, I really think that it's important to acknowledge the debate that is ongoing in our country. I hear this often with my family, my friends, with employers. There's a consistent debate on whether or not cannabis is good or bad. And there's a lot of compelling arguments. I often get much more hostility when I introduce the name of my company and what we do, so I appreciate that. But there are a lot of people who are really looking to make this a binary discussion. What I'll suggest we use as a context moving forward is that cannabis is not good or bad. Cannabis is both good and bad. I have met people whose lives have been radically improved by using medical cannabis. I've also seen plenty of studies and crime reports where young people using cannabis irresponsibly or people using cannabis in operating vehicles are deadly. So I think if we stop trying to put this into a small box, it'll help us kind of open our minds and make sense of this topic. So the industry in Canada right now is not simple. It's actually quite complex. There's 4 sources of cannabis, and we tend to treat them all the same, but I want to provide a little bit of insight into how they're so different. So first of all, there's a legal medical cannabis market that exists today. There is an illegal medical cannabis market, which is any storefront dispensary that you'll drive by or walk past. Those are all illegal. There is an upcoming legal recreational market, which we will hear about quite soon. Actually, there's a vote going through Senate today. So by the end of the day, my stock will be either up quite a bit or down quite a bit. And then lastly, there's this black market that will continue to produce cannabis and illegal cannabis products for years to come. These products are varying dramatically in quality, so it's important to note that. Also important to note that it's not just the plant anymore that we're using, the dried flower. Medical cannabis products today are being sold as oils and capsules. Those are actually the product types that are increasing in popularity the most, because if you're a person with a job, it's much easier to have consistent dosing to take a gel cap than it is to vaporize in your car. So I think it's very important to recognize that the term cannabis is a category, but it is not a description of every product that you'll see. And most importantly are these 2 cannabinoids called CBD and THC. So THC is psychoactive. This is what gets people high. CBD is non-psychoactive. This is what they give to children with epilepsy. It's important to note when speaking about cannabis, especially cannabis in the workplace, what the type of product is. You would treat a high THC flower that someone is smoking for pain management very differently than you would treat a CBD oil with less than 1% THC that people are taking for arthritis or epilepsy or Dravet syndrome or something like that. So to take it one step further, both of these markets, these legal markets, are going to be heavily regulated by Health Canada. The 105 or so companies that produce for the medical market today will be producing for the recreational market. The medical market's over 5 years old. There's over 270,000 patients. The recreational market is projected to have about 39% of adult Canadians who will use recreational cannabis. So now we get to talk about maybe the more controversial aspect of this, which is the impact on Canadian workplaces. So first of all, 22% of adult Canadians use recreational cannabis illegally today. You're already dealing with this in your workplace. If you don't think you are, I think you're being naive. So we are already managing this. What I see as some of the positive impacts, number one is people who have a legitimate medical need for this product, who are able to find the right product and the right dosing, can have a much improved output in terms of energy levels, concentration, pain management, which would actually lead to them being more productive employees. In addition to that, the legal medical cannabis market provides an alternative to opioids that is drastically less addictive than an opioid medication would be. The negative impacts, I'm sure we're all well aware of these or can fathom what they are. The likelihood of workplace impairment is going to go up because you're going to have about double the people using recreational cannabis. The worst case scenario, obviously, is that impairment leads to accidents and incidents and inappropriate behavior. That is a very, very realistic possibility. We've seen that in Colorado. Impaired driving has gone up in Colorado. The dependency issues as well. Something that not a lot of people know is about 9% of people who use cannabis develop an addiction. So if you double the amount of people using cannabis, it's not unreasonable to assume you're going to be doubling the addiction rates. So we have to be ready as employers to manage that, either through an EAP or through normal accommodation for substance dependencies. Perhaps the biggest issue is concern and confusion for employers. I feel bad for the group of people here because I don't think that you have had a lot of great resources provided to you by government to help manage cannabis in the workplace. There's a lot of conflicting opinions. It's quite complicated. There's still not a definitive impairment test. So I would say this is going to be one of the biggest challenges we face is how are our employers going to manage this integration into workplace where people will be using legal recreational cannabis on weekends and then having THC in their system for potentially a month afterwards. So, that got butchered. So managing cannabis in the workplace. So some of the major takeaways that I've learned after working with dozens and dozens of employers is one is don't rely on anecdotal information or assumptions or what your parents told you growing up. There's a lot of new information on cannabis. Focusing on facts is critical and kind of moving away from biases and stigma so that you're making informed decisions and having an informed opinion. Be proactive. I would definitely not recommend launching policies a week before legalization when it is available for sale in Canada. I would say the sooner the better, where you can develop policies and implement those policies in your workplace, ensure that you're properly communicating with your employees on what their expectations are for conduct. As early as possible, I think, is the best case. And developing a sustainable program for managing substances. And I'll elaborate on that on the next slide, but recognizing that cannabis is certainly one substance that causes impairment, but it is one of maybe 100. So I think we're putting a disproportionate amount of time on just cannabis, when in reality, what we should really be thinking is a more holistic approach to managing all of the substances that can cause impairment and lead to safety risks. And lastly, be prepared to adapt and evolve to the legislation as well as other substances coming in through the legalization channels. So when I talk about sustainability, what I mean is looking at a model to categorize all substances that cause impairment and developing a strategy to manage the categories that fall into this model rather than trying to master each individual substance. I don't think that's possible. I don't think that's something that we want to embark on. So I would recommend looking at all these substances, putting them in one of these 4 categories, and consistently managing those substances in a way that is respecting of the category itself rather than the individual substances. So an example, category 1, legal non-medical substances that cause impairment. This is going to be recreational cannabis when it is legalized. This is also what we're dealing with today with alcohol. You certainly wouldn't allow someone to have open alcohol at work. There's no reason for allowing anyone to have recreational cannabis at work. We can manage our recreational cannabis issues very similarly to how we're managing alcohol. The second is illegal non-medical substances, which is where cannabis falls today until it is legally sold in Canada for recreational purposes. This can be managed the same way as cocaine or heroin. I know it sounds harsh, but until it is legal, this is an illegal substance that people could bring into the workplace. I'd strongly recommend taking an approach where it's treated as other illegal substances. The third category is where I think we have to really look at, we have to look at medical cannabis. So medical cannabis is just one substance that causes impairment that is prescribed by physicians. So if we think about opioids, if we think about even over-the-counter medications such as sleeping pills, we can accommodate these substances or we cannot, but we have to go through a proper accommodation process. And rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, I would recommend investing in a clear accommodation process so that when medical cannabis comes up, you would handle it the same way you would with an opioid and assess risk and be fair to the employee while also respecting safety in the workplace. Last slide. This party animal is my father. At the time of this interview, he was a detective with York Regional Police, specifically focused on drug and vice enforcement in York Region, which is where my company is. And as you can imagine, I did not follow a logical or a preferred career path. And we got through it. We got through it as a family. Everyone's happy. But why I think this is relevant is because the same strategies that we used in our little career debates could help workplaces, which is focusing on facts, not emotion or opinion, respecting other people's opinions, and keeping an open mind, because there's a lot to learn about this substance. Thank you.